This is one of the most memorable scenes in Malèna. Short, wavy hair paired with alluring red lips, an exquisite figure accentuated by a stylish black dress, and charming high heels, highlighting her slender legs. She strolled through the town square, then sat on that sunlit bench under the covetous gazes of countless men. When she took out a cigarette, the men around her scrambled to light it, eager not to miss the opportunity. And thus, one of the most iconic moments in film history was born. I'm sure many of you have seen this movie, but what you watched was the version cut by more than 20 minutes. After relentless effort, I finally found the uncut version, which runs for 1 hour and 48 minutes. The most heavily censored scene is a minute-long sequence of her bathing with a lemon. The visuals were indeed difficult to pass censorship, but cutting the scene was a great loss, as it played a significant role in shaping the protagonist's character. Later, I will focus on explaining the purpose of this scene and use the uncut version to show you the greatness of this film, as well as why, at the end, those people greeted Malèna so warmly. In 1941, in a small town in Sicily, the sunlight poured down unreservedly, draping everything in a golden warmth, making Malèna appear like a goddess, radiating a divine glow. She was undoubtedly the most beautiful woman in town, and every time she walked the streets, she unconsciously drew the eyes of countless men. At that time, Renato, who was not yet 13 years old, was also deeply captivated by her. Even after many years, he still vividly remembers it. On the day Mussolini declared war on Britain and France, he received the first bicycle of his life. As a child, he didn't understand what war was. He simply pedaled his bike freely through the streets or used a magnifying glass to burn ants on the ground. Little did he know that, like those ants, some people would struggle and perish under the most dazzling light of the world. Among them was Malèna. That was the first time Renato saw Malèna. She wore a simple yet alluring dress with black wavy hair cascading over her shoulders, swaying gently in the breeze as she walked gracefully under the sunlight. She looked as if she had stepped out of a painting, exuding an irresistible charm that made the young boys follow her breathlessly, unable to take their eyes off her. And it wasn't just the boys. Grown men of all kinds lusted after Malèna, considering it an honor just to interact with her, never bothering to hide their desires. When their wives found out, they didn't blame their husbands. Instead, they unanimously resented Malèna, wishing she would disappear. But Malèna couldn't be bothered to explain anything. She simply lived her life as usual, walking elegantly through each day, hoping to maintain her best self for the day her husband would return. From that first encounter, Malèna's image was imprinted in Renato's mind like a brand. Every night, he tossed and turned, his mind filled with her image. Like the other men, he began searching for Malèna all over town. Eventually, he even skipped school to wait outside her house, just to catch another glimpse of her, ideally, even speak to her. He thought it was a foolish dream, until one day Malèna, dressed in a lace nightgown, lazily called him over. The boy's heart pounded with excitement. He soon realized that Malèna only wanted him to buy her a pack of cigarettes. But being able to see his goddess up close, he was already satisfied. As Renato bent down to pick up the coin, he was delighted to find that the playful wind had lifted a corner of Malèna's dress. The tantalizing sight made his mind buzz. Just as he thought something might actually happen between them, he sadly realized it was all just his imagination. Unable to contain his longing, he started secretly watching Malèna every night. He never saw anything particularly seductive, but he did discover Malèna's deep love for her husband. Sometimes, when overwhelmed by longing, she would embrace her husband's photo and dance passionately. Renato envied Malèna's husband and longed to be part of her life. So he bought the same record from the store and played that song every night, immersing himself in his fantasy of being alone with Malèna. He wanted to introduce himself to Malèna, but he didn't dare. Thus, he listened to the lonely sound of the waves and secretly documented everything about Malèna, including what the townspeople thought of her. Later, Renato developed a habit of sitting alone in the cinema, imagining himself and Malèna as the leads in a dramatic, romantic love story. But Malèna's fate was far more turbulent than any movie. The front lines suddenly brought news of Malèna's husband's death. Losing her beloved, she was devastated, unsure of how to face the days ahead. Renato wanted to seize the opportunity to comfort her, but his cowardice kept him from making any move. Instead, in his dark fantasies, he imagined himself giving her a gentle kiss, making Malèna fall hopelessly in love with him. At her husband's funeral, Malèna stood high above, receiving the blessings of the townspeople. Yet from their eyes, she saw nothing but endless greed and possession. They even blatantly slandered her in private.
Pare che il dentista Cusumano perse la testa per lei. Ieri si disciassa a vederla passare dalla finestra e ci c'è polpo, te sta un incisivo sano invece del canino cariato!
Dentista o non dentista? Come ve lo spiegate che non si vede più in giro?
E si vede che c'è troppo da fare!
Renato despised these people, but he only dared to take petty revenge. His boldest act was merely shattering their windows, but for Malèna, such revenge was far from enough. Yet Renato, believing he had protected Malèna, became even bolder. He even secretly took her intimate clothing, adding Malèna's lingering fragrance to his already unchecked fantasies. Although his father discovered his filthy secret early the next morning, Renato did not feel he had done anything wrong. After all, every other man in town was doing the same. Why was he the only one forbidden? On the contrary, his desire for Malèna grew even stronger. Without her husband, Malèna's life became increasingly difficult. Countless men coveted her beauty, and even many married men fought over her late at night. After their quarrels, the wives still blamed everything on Malèna. She was too beautiful, too unchaste. They never considered that she was simply a helpless victim. Even her own father decided to sever ties with her. Malèna tried to change her situation, even taking the men who insulted her to court. But she never expected that even the lawyer would try to take advantage of her. Malèna thought that marrying a lawyer wouldn't be too bad. It would at least secure her future. Yet his family strongly opposed the marriage, and for the sake of his reputation, the lawyer didn't insist. Gradually, Malèna had to endure not only harassment and insults, but also the humiliation of begging for food to survive. So many men desired her, yet no one openly dared to offer her a job. With no other choice, she traded her beauty and dignity for the means to survive. Renato saw everything, but could do nothing. He didn't even have the courage to offer her a word of comfort. Misfortune struck again. Malèna's father was killed in an air raid. The men became even more reckless, using her father's funeral as an excuse to line up and take advantage of her. Malèna felt nothing but heartbreak, yet she could only endure in silence. That night, in the solitude of her room, she cut off her long raven-black hair in front of the mirror. If the world had already condemned her as such, then she decided to embrace their perception. Once, she had lived cautiously, but now, having lost everything, she wanted to reclaim whatever dignity she had left in her own way. She confidently stepped into the sunlit streets of the town once more. After all she had endured, she remained breathtakingly beautiful. Even sitting idly with a cigarette between her lips was enough to make countless men rush to light it for her. To live with some semblance of dignity, she deliberately sought contact with the Nazi officers. This terrified Renato because he knew that now he could never have Malèna in this lifetime. But fate is always unpredictable. Just as her circumstances began to improve, the war turned against the Germans. As soon as the Nazis were defeated, the town's women stormed the cafe, brutally dragging Malèna into the street to unleash years of resentment upon her. As her hair was cut away bit by bit, the last glimmer of hope in her heart was completely taken from her. Trembling, she let out a soul-wrenching wail of despair. Perhaps Renato was the only one in the entire town who truly felt sorry for her. But his pity was worthless. It could not offer Malèna even the slightest protection. Staggering away from the crowd, she wrapped herself tightly in a black cloth, covering her body as if she were a walking corpse. For the first time, she left the town that had never shown her kindness. The sun still shone brightly, yet Renato's gaze dimmed as he watched Malèna disappear. Perhaps, as time passed, he would gradually forget the complexity of his feelings from his youth. But the guilt buried deep within his heart would only grow stronger. No one expected that Malèna's husband, Nino, had not died. After shedding blood for his country, he should have been treated as a hero. Yet, he was forgotten on the battlefield. After a long journey of begging his way home, he returned to his beloved hometown, only to find that his house had been forcibly taken over and that his wife had become the town's so-called disgrace. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He tried to argue, but no one was willing to acknowledge him as a hero. Because if Nino was a hero, then those who had wronged his wife would be utterly condemned. Thus, everyone tacitly chose not to speak about Malèna. Renato felt deeply uneasy. The guilt he had long harbored for Malèna surged through him like a flood. That night, he secretly sent an anonymous letter, detailing Malèna's tragic experiences.
Credetemi, la signora Malèna è stata una moglie fedelissima. Ha amato solo voi. Questa è la pura verità. Poi sono successe tante cose, è vero, ma a quel tempo in fondo voi eravate già morto da un pezzo. L'ultima volta che l'ho vista era sul treno per Messina. Buona fortuna. Dovrei firmarmi un amico, come si usa nelle lettere anonime, ma io mi chiamo Renato.
Nino did not seek revenge. Instead, filled with love and sorrow for Malèna, he set out on a long journey to find her. Time seemed to stand still in the town. Nothing had changed. The same men still greeted each other with gentlemanly smiles, yet they all knew the filth hidden in their hearts. Renato, it seemed, had finally let go of Malèna. He found himself a beautiful girlfriend. At that moment, a familiar figure appeared before everyone's eyes. Malèna was dressed in red, vibrant and striking, yet her face no longer carried the carefree expression of the past. Instead, there was a calmness that came from enduring the trials of life. She lowered her gaze, seemingly uninterested in the world around her. The only thing that mattered was the husband beside her, the one true anchor in her life. Malèna had gained weight, and she had aged. She was no longer a threat to the women of the town. So, with great magnanimity, they forgave her and greeted her warmly. Though she hated these people with every fiber of her being, if she wanted to continue living here with her husband, she had to learn to forget and move on. Her steps were no longer elegant, but carried a sense of urgency. Her husband was waiting at home for dinner. She had become an ordinary woman, no different from the other housewives around her. Yet, once again, the boy who had admired her resumed his silent following. The bag suddenly tore, and oranges scattered across the ground. Renato hurried forward to help. For the first time in his life, he was so close to his goddess, and when their hands brushed accidentally, his heart raced uncontrollably. But Renato still did not confess the burning love in his heart, because he too had grown up. From the moment he first saw her at 12.5 years old, Malèna had become the woman he would remember for a lifetime. Yet in the end, they walked in opposite directions, drifting further apart on their life's journey until they completely faded from each other's memory. I used to love Tornatore's Cinema Paradiso and The Legend of 1900. But after watching Malèna, I found its impact even more profound. Why did Malèna bathe with lemons? We all know that lemons are highly acidic, and their strong acids can burn the skin. Some say it was because she had been ostracized by the town, and the only way she could get food was by selling her body. Perhaps she wanted to make her body sour to deter these men, a form of self-defense. Others believe that since the women in town refused to sell her soap, she used the scent of lemons to better serve the men who provided her with food. But I think bathing with lemons was her final act of defiance for her deceased husband. Though she was breathtakingly beautiful, she remained a woman of unwavering loyalty. I know that many people focus on the ugliness of human nature in this film, but rather than analyzing the morality of the townspeople, I believe that war itself was the true culprit behind all of this. During that turbulent time, people's moral boundaries were constantly tested, and the darkest sides of human nature were brought to the surface. Malèna's suffering was not just an unfortunate twist of fate. It was the inevitable result of a society crumbling under the shadow of war, where order collapsed and morality disintegrated. She became a symbol of the era's tragedy, embodying the weaknesses and ugliness of human nature exposed amid social turmoil and chaos, a direct reflection of society's collective downfall and loss. The film does not simply portray her personal struggle in the abyss of suffering. It is a stark depiction of a society sinking into moral decay, incapable of pulling itself out of the darkness. After Malèna's husband returned, the women in town took the initiative to show kindness to her. It wasn't just because she now had a husband's support or because she had aged and lost her allure. Rather, as the war came to an end and social order gradually restored, the dark thoughts in their hearts were once again forced into hiding. At the same time, I believe the film profoundly reveals the essence of a patriarchal society. In this town, a woman's fate was entirely dictated by men. Every move she made was scrutinized and judged under the male gaze. Men desired her, yet condemned her with moral righteousness. Women, driven by jealousy, attacked her mercilessly. In a society ruled by men, Malèna had no power to fight back. She could only be swept along by the tides of fate. In such a world, beauty itself became a crime. Throughout history, we have seen countless individuals rise to brilliance, only to be met with jealousy, rumors, and isolation instead of admiration. And when they fall, the world tramples them without mercy, forgetting their past glories. But the moment they blend into the ordinary, they are suddenly granted a strange kind of acceptance. It seems that most people can only tolerate mediocrity. I'm sure many of you watching understand this feeling all too well. All right, that's all for today. See you next time, and thank you.